The following program is produced by Marshfield Community Television.
Hello, my name is Kim Krieger, and I am the coordinator here at the Northwood County Historical Society at the Governor Upham House.
And my name is Vicki Schnitzler, and I am the president for the Marshfield Area Genealogy Group here in Marshfield.
Today we're going to be doing Beyond the Dress, which is off the Victorian Wedding Christmas dress display that we have here at the Northwood County Historical Society. And we'll be highlighting 6 dresses and the people who are involved with that dress or connected to that dress. The Northwood County Historical Society is at 212 West 3rd Street here in Marshfield. And if you've not had an opportunity to see the dress display, it will be up until the end of February. The house was built by William H. Upham in 1880. And the reason we chose to do the dresses was because of William and Mary's wedding anniversary, which was December 19th, 1867. The 150th wedding anniversary was this past year in 2017. So we thought for Christmas we would put up a wedding dress display, which ran from the Christmas until the end of February. And the dresses on display are ranging from 1870s to 2014. A lot of the dresses that you'll see are many different sizes, colors, lengths, and what something is interesting for some people is the colors that are there. A lot of people think white, but there were some that were black, some that you'll see that are brown, a lot that are ecru, and up until 1840, when Queen Victoria made it fashionable to be in a white dress, the main dresses that people would wear would be something that was their best dress. Dresses were expensive, and it didn't make a lot of sense to wear something that could get dirty easy, that could only be worn once. And so quite often women would wear dresses that they could wear over and over again. Some of the ones that you'll see that we have on display vary in length, of course, all the way down to the ground to T length, and we have one even that looks like a flapper dress from the 1920s. So they come in a bunch of different styles. Oftentimes around the 1950s is when the dresses became a bit, actually 1920s they were shorter, and then again in the 1950s. There are also some that are a little more plain than others. Some that are quite fancy, and some of them that we have are just very simple. And quite often it may have been the bouquet or the veil or the lady herself that made the dress more than the dress made the bride. In the next slide, we see more of the fancier dresses. The one in the middle is a 1920s dress, and that one is really a beautiful dress. The one on your left-hand side is a 1980s dress, and that one is probably falling more in line with what we visualize when we think of dresses today. The first dress that we are going to feature is an 1897 dress that was worn by Christine Haroff and Paul Wines. And the dress itself is a really pretty color. It's almost got an iridescent quality to it. Paul and Christine were married in Poland, and this is one of those dresses that even though it was something that she probably wore for special occasions, it did have more of a special quality to it, just because of the quality of the fabric and how it had a really kind of an iridescent quality to it.
Well, Catherine, or Christine, was born on August 2nd, 1875 in Warsaw, Poland. And she did marry Paul there, also in Poland. Paul actually was a farmer when he was in Poland, and he continued to be a farmer when he came here to Wauwatosa here in Wisconsin. They did have 4 children, Richard, Margaret, Edward, and Martha. And Christine and Paul both became naturalized citizens in 1928. And I did forget to mention that they did immigrate both together with 3 of their children from Poland in 1904. This is a picture of kind of an intertwined Heroff and Wines family. You'll notice that there's quite a few gentlemen, and then the ladies, most of them are sitting with some of the children. We actually have Paul, who is standing towards the center in the back with a dark suit, and then his wife, Christine, is right in front of him. Her sister, Paulina, is sitting way over on the far right, and then her husband, John, is standing off to her left behind her. There's also 2 other of the Heroff brothers. So there's 2 brothers and 2 sisters in the photograph with their spouses, and then Paul and John. And it's also interesting that Paul and John were orphans, and they actually lived in an orphanage together when they were in Poland. And actually, from what the story goes on to say, was that they stayed in that orphanage together until they were of age that they could be released, and they went out on their own. And I think that's one of the reasons why family is so important to them. Because they were orphans, they continued to be together, and it's interesting that they married sisters. So it's just kind of a cool story and a cool picture.
Our next dress is a dress that is 1904, Louisa Gant and Herman Tillich. And this dress was donated by Jan Thomas in 2001. It's a good illustration of one of the handmade dresses that we have. This one would have had a corset, and it was one that Louisa herself and her relative Emma Uthmeyer put together from one of the stores here in town.
Well, Louisa was born on August 27, 1873 at Jackson, Wisconsin. And the material, as Kim started to mention, was purchased here in town at the Uthmeyer Hintz mercantile store. Her relative, Emma, was a milliner who also made the headpiece and the veil. A milliner, if you're not familiar with that, is actually a hat maker. And so here's a picture of the Uthmeyer store. I do believe that Mr. Uthmeyer is one of the gentlemen in the picture, but I wouldn't be able to tell you exactly which one he is right now. The Uthmeyer store was located in the North 100 block on Central Avenue on the east side of the street, right along about where the air pumps for Quick Trip are now here in Marshfield. And so it has a totally different look. The building is no longer there, obviously. Through her work as a hostess at the Marshfield Public Restroom, she made many friends, a wide circle of friends, and the Marshfield restroom, which was something that was also another interesting story. There was a law in the state of Wisconsin that all municipalities had to have a public restroom. Now, a restroom isn't necessarily what we think of a restroom today. It wasn't a bathroom where you could go and freshen up, but the public restroom was actually a house that you could go to relax after a long journey, either on the train or even in a car. It was a gathering place where you could meet other friends if you were just coming into town. You could freshen up, have beverages, coffee, whatever, light refreshments and things like that. This particular public restroom was located 105 West 3rd is the address. The house is still there. It's a beautiful home. and I believe there is another business in there at this time right now. Here are two different clippings that just kind of verify that there was a public restroom in Marshfield. The first one talks about Mrs. Tillett, and she is entertaining guests that came in for a convention in the city. And so they stopped at the public restroom and had refreshments and light snacks. The other story, which I find was really interesting, is that Mrs. Tillett must have had a desk somewhat near the front of the building, probably to greet guests or whatever as they came in. And there was a young man in the restroom just relaxing, and he got up to leave, and Mrs. Tillett wasn't by her desk. And there was a small, what they called a small bank, sitting on the desk. It was probably a small box that people could leave tips in, or cash or whatever as they left, just as a gratis for being able to use the facilities, pay for their refreshments, whatever. But anyway, Mrs. Tillett turned around as the boy left, and the small bank was missing from her desk. And so she followed the young man out into the street and asked him if he had something that he had taken from the restroom that didn't belong to him. And he looked a little sheepish and finally pulled the bank out from his pocket and gave it back to her. So a couple different articles in the newspaper as you're doing research on different things that you find. But it just kind of verifies that there was a public restroom in Marshfield, which I think was really interesting. Now, Mr. Tillett, there's not an awful lot of information that we could find about him, but it is interesting that he was born in Fond du Lac on June 27, 1873. And they moved to Marshfield right after they got married in 1904. One of the things that I could find on Mr. Tillett was that he was employed for at least 30 years or over 30 years for the William Null Hardware Company. Mr. Tillett passed away in 1961.
Our next dress was one that was worn by Rose Billy when her marriage to John Paul Adler, or J.P. Adler. This dress was donated to the Historical Society by Anne and Betty Adler in 2008. And it's a good illustration of how dresses changed as the person who owned them would continue to modify the dress. If you notice in the description, it says the bride was attired in an accordion-plaited silk crepe Jeannette gown with pearl trimmings over satin Swiss with a court train caught with large butterfly and wore a veil of princess lace. Now, if you notice, the description and the dress that we have here in this slide do not match each other. And it is known quite often that, as I mentioned, the women would keep their dresses and would wear them over and over again, and they would alter them according to what the fashion was, or as their bodies changed, according to how the dress could fit their body. So this particular dress is one that we know it is the wedding dress because that is what Anne and Betty had said. But if you notice in the next slide, you will see that the bottom part of the dress does match the bottom part of the wedding picture that Rosa is wearing here. So we can see that the bodice looks a little bit different than the other picture, but elements of this dress was kept, and the top part of it was just really pretty, even from when she wore it as a bride, but even now as she had worn it later.
Well, Rosa was born in Marshfield on May 22nd, 1888, and she studied music in Milwaukee after attending the Marshfield schools. She was an accomplished pianist and singer and was a teacher in Marshfield before her marriage to J.P. Rosa was a member of the Fortnightly Musical Club, a member and former vice president of the Marshfield Business and Professional Women's Club, a member of the Marshfield's Women Club and also the Catholic Daughters of America and the Women's Catholic Order of Foresters. So she was a busy lady. And then on September 28th, 1915, J.P. did marry Rosamund. She was the daughter of Hans Billy and Anne Larson Billy. The marriage was blessed, as Kim did mention, by two daughters, Anne Victoria Adler and also Elizabeth, and we know her lovingly as Betty Adler. J.P. was born September 23rd, 1887, and he was one of 13 children of Philip and Margaret Adler. Now, John had a very interesting career in the theater movie business here in Marshfield and also some other places around the state. Before we get into that, he attended St. John's School here, and he lived on the home farm working with his father until he was 18. At the age of 21, he leased the Opera House, and that's the picture or the inside of the Opera House that you can see here. And he renamed it the Adler Theater, and he renamed it in 1908. His love and interest grew for the business, and in around 1920 he purchased his second theater. And on this particular slide over on the right-hand side of the street, you can see a small sign that says Trio, and that is the name of his second theater. It was actually a theater that was owned previously by Kleiner, Lang, and Sharman. It had been a hardware store that the three of those gentlemen owned before they converted it into a theater. So I think it's kind of interesting to see the progression of a store or a space along Central Avenue that was a hardware store and then became a theater, and then J.P. had bought it. Several years after he purchased it, he did a full renovation on it. And at that time, he actually, after it was renovated, there was a contest held to name the new theater. And on this particular slide, if you look again, probably about a third of the way in from on the right-hand side, you can see a tall vertical sign that says Relda. And that was the winning entry for the contest. And the reason behind the name Relda was that it was Adler spelled backwards. And at the time of the contest, there were actually 3 entries that had named or suggested that as the name. But AEBB was the winner of a $25 first prize for coming up with that name. On September 28, 1937, he celebrated his 50th birthday by dedicating yet another theater to his collection, and that was the new Adler Theater here in town. At that time, in 1937, it was one of the most modern theaters in the Mississippi Valley. His interests didn't stop there, however. In 1952, he went on to build his latest venture, which was the 1013 Drive-In south of Marshfield, out on Highway 13. He did have other theaters in his business collection that he was involved with. He had the Rosa and the Palace theaters that were both in Wapaka. He had the Adler and the Armory theaters at Neilsville. And then he also had the New Badge Theater in Merrill. And he did not leave Milwaukee out. He did have interests and had some partners in the theater business and was involved with some theaters also in Milwaukee. J.P. passed away on July 2nd, 1959 of a coronary heart attack while he was out on the golf course here in Marshfield. Rosa remained an active officer in the Adler Theater Corporation until 1963 when she gave up that responsibility because of illness. And then about a year later, on November 22nd, 1964, Rosa passed away.
Our next dress is 1937, a dress that belonged to William Dents and, Elizabeth Dents and William Upham Jr. And it's actually the dress that we're sitting next to right now. This dress was donated to the Historical Society in 2009 by Monty Upham, and that was Elizabeth's, or Betty, and Bill's daughter. They had 3 kids, and Monty was their second child. This dress is the only one in our collection that is related to an Upham. And so it was nice to be able to put it on display. And a little bit about it, the 1937 was, of course, the kind of in the Depression era. And the dresses at the time were a little more simple, a little classier. In the 1920s, we kind of lose the corset, and the freedom of the form is there, and so the dresses are not as cinched up and tight, and so this one has a classic kind of style. The Hollywood and the glamour that was associated with it were kind of things that inspired the type of dresses that were coming out in this era. Satin fabric, silks, which were not as, they existed before, but they were a part of the dresses now. And if you notice in this one, it has a butterfly caps on the sleeves, and that is because, as you notice in the picture here, on the sleeve, it's puffed up, and if you look at it head on, it does look like a butterfly.
Well, here's a picture of Betty and Bill on their wedding day, just coming out of the church. Bill was kind of an interesting character. There are a lot of stories that have been documented over time talking about Bill. A couple of them, first of all, he enjoyed adventure when he was growing up. And he was always getting into trouble with his little brother. And most of the time they were found running wild around town, getting into mischief. But they were quite the pair together. And one of the stories particularly is when Bill was 19 and his little brother Frederick was 15, Bill grabbed one of his buddies and Frederick, and they decided to go on an adventure. And so they took the car and they decided to go driving, and they ended up in the state of Oregon. That was quite an adventure. When Bill finally returned, his mother was not too happy with him, and right after that she enrolled him in an ROTC program. And I think part of that was just to make sure that he did finish school and start getting some training that he could use, maybe to help make him so he wasn't quite so wild. But anyway, he did finish his high school education here in Marshfield. He went on to enroll in the University of Michigan for a year, and then he attended the Milton College in Wisconsin for a year before he went on to UW-Madison. And it was while he was attending school in Madison that he met the love of his life. He was out skating one day out on Lake Mendota, and he met Elizabeth Dents, who was also a student at the university. And she did capture his heart, and it wasn't long after that they started planning their wedding. They did continue their education at the university, and they both graduated. They were married while they both were still students at Madison in 1937. The wedding did take place in Milwaukee, however. Bill later went on to graduate from the University of Wisconsin in June of 1938, and then a year later, Bill began attending the law school at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. And it was during the World War II in 1941, just a few years later, that Bill was sent to Fort Custer, Michigan to enlist. He served as a reserve officer, second lieutenant, and at the time of his August 1942 deployment to Iceland, Betty was already 4 months pregnant with their first child. After Iceland, Bill went to England and then was transferred to France, where he was injured during the Battle of the Bulge. He honorably received a Purple Heart and a Bronze Star prior to being discharged on September 1945. And when he returned home to his loving wife, Betty, and their firstborn son, William III, William III was already almost 4 years old. He and Betty bought a home on Bradford Avenue that following November, where they had many fond memories raising their family. They were blessed with 2 additional children, Monty and Darby. Now Betty also has quite an interesting education and background. She came to UW-Madison in 1935 after she graduated at the top of her class from the Milwaukee Downer Seminary. Elizabeth was elected to Sigma Epsilon Sigma, a freshman honorary society, and then in her sophomore year she won an annual Wisconsin Alumni Association scholarship. She was elected to the Phi Delta Kappa and the Mortar Board, which are the highest honors to be given to a woman student in her junior year, with a grade point of 2.95 on a 3.0 scale. She completed both her Bachelor of Arts and her Master of Arts degree within 4 years, both at the same time in 1939. Also in 1939, she received a gold medal from the Governor of France for her distinction in French study, which she was very good at, obviously. Also in 1939, she completed a Red Cross course, which was the beginning of many volunteer positions that she continued in, including fundraising for the Red Cross. In 1942, about the time that Bill was deployed, she joined the First Church of Christ Scientist in Milwaukee, and over the years while Bill was deployed, she served in a lot of different areas. She was the Literature Distribution Committee, or served on that committee. She was on the Usher Committee, one of the secretaries for the Sunday School, and she was also one of the Sunday School teachers. Now the next slide that we have is actually a picture of Bill and Betty and their 3 children. This was actually taken from a video that is online, and if you look for Bill Upham or William Upham, William Henry Upham, this is one of the hits that you will get. It's a video that talks about his life and a little bit more detail if you want more things. But the slide I think is interesting because when he came back to the United States after his deployment, the next year he started at the Schlitz Brewing Company, and he was there for I think it was about 13 years before he left and went on to become an insurance agent. And he did work for Northwest Mutual Life Insurance Company after that. And it was while he was working at home with the insurance business that his wife decided to become more involved and help him out with some of the bookkeeping because she was very good with numbers. And so she became his secretary at home. And then that year then, she decided, well, if I can do this, she said, I can also become an insurance agent myself. And so the next picture, I think, is really interesting because it kind of shows that she was on the cutting edge of something. Here she is in a graduating class. It was actually the third class of 1958 career school down in Milwaukee. It is the school that individuals go to become an insurance agent. And out of the 25 individuals, you notice that there is one female, and that is Betty. So it was kind of interesting that, you know, she was mixed in a pool of men. Also, the Northwest Insurance, or Northwest Mutual Insurance Company, wasn't quite sure maybe how to deal with having women invade in this field of men. And so one of the awards, and Betty and Bill both went on to receive many awards for their sales for the insurance company. But even on one of the awards that she received, and if you read it carefully, it says for his work in sales, which they weren't even able to put the wording correctly. It was probably a pre-done thing that they added her name to. Bill, and this is one other thing that I thought was really interesting. Several years after Bill left Schlitz, and he was already an insurance agent at this time, but as an anniversary present for Betty, he bought 2 shares of Schlitz Brewing Company stock for her, which I thought was kind of interesting. And the quote that he had on the card that went with it, it says, "For the return of the swallow," and I thought that was kind of cool. Betty decided, however, at the age of 80, when they both reached 80, that it was time to retire, which I thought, you know, 80 years old and they're still out there selling insurance. One of the things that Betty also had said in several different interviews was that it was easy for her to relate to women in the family, because women were the ones that were taking care of the children and making sure that things were taken care of in the house, and it was easy for her to relate to the women to get them to buy the insurance. It was just kind of a way that women could, at that point in time, kind of be assured that their children would be taken care of in case something happened to them. Betty passed away September 12, 2008. The following days were very difficult for Bill, but he spent a lot of time paddling his little three-wheel tricycle around Milwaukee, where he was well liked and well known. And at the age of 93, Bill passed away on August 16, 2009. So it was only about a year after Betty passed away that Bill.
Our next dress, it has proven to be an interesting discovery. We initially put it on display because in the documentation attached to the dress, it was listed as Millie Hoopy's wedding suit. And 1945 was a time when suits were common as wedding outfits. Oftentimes, husbands-to-be were going to be shipped out, or there wasn't enough money, or there wasn't the material available, and so wedding suits were quite common. So it didn't raise any red flags for us to put this up as what we thought was Millie Hoopy's wedding suit. However, upon further investigation, and in contacting actually it was Millie's daughter, we found out that the dress that is described in the newspaper, which Vicki will talk about shortly, does not match the suit that we have on display. So this kind of was good for us, because part of what this display is helping us to do is do a good evaluation of how are the dresses doing. Is the documentation that is connected to them accurate? And we've found some discrepancies which we've been able to correct. And this is one of those situations where we are able to now look for the correct documentation, but also we do have now a picture that Margaret Millie's daughter, was able to send to us. So we have that dress documented. And what's interesting is when Millie herself donated the suit in 1998, it was written down as wedding suit. So I can understand that is how the misunderstanding of it her being her wedding suit came to be. So we will be able to correct that now.
And I think it's kind of interesting too that, you know, she listed it as her wedding suit, not necessarily her wedding dress, but it was probably part of her trousseau that she wore after the wedding when when they left for their honeymoon or whatever. Well, part of the research that we did find, and the slide that you see right now is a picture of her with a very short little clipping entitled Weddings. And this was on the front page of the October 30th, 1945 newspaper. When I did a search in newspapers.com, this is what came up. And I stopped there. I didn't keep looking. And I was a bad researcher because there were lots of other things that popped up. But I had found this thinking that, oh, this is the description of the wedding, that's all there is. Well, later on when I was doing additional research on her husband, and I went through more of the clippings and things that popped up for newspapers.com, in the same newspaper, back on page 7, was a different heading on that first paragraph, the same picture, so she had her picture in the paper twice, and then it goes on to give a full description of the dress, which matches much more closely to the picture that we received from her daughter Margaret. But it's a good lesson as far as the research, because don't just stop with the first thing you find, and don't always assume that there's only one clipping in a newspaper.
This next slide is a description of the wedding dress, and the next slide will show also the wedding photo of the Hoopies, as does the next slide. But this is what helped us to realize that the dress that we had up was not her wedding dress, because it didn't say suit, and it was talking about a long veil and long dress. So again, the research that goes into putting these exhibits up does help correct some of the discrepancies.
This is a picture of Ron and also of Mildred later on in her life. Ron worked for the Felker firm for about 30 years, the last 13 of which were in the sales department. Ron passed away Monday, November 22nd, 1971 from a heart attack while he was out hunting. Mildred had an education in bookkeeping, but after her marriage to Ron, she became a full-time homemaker, and they moved to Marshfield. The Hoopies had 4 girls. Mary and Margaret are in the center of this photo, and they were twins. The 2 other girls, Rhonda and Pam, are also shown there. Several years before Ron passed away, Mildred went back to work at Marshfield High School as a library assistant, and then later on as a guidance department secretary. It was during that time that she made many long-lasting friendships with her coworkers. She mentored and was loved by many of the students who continued to keep in contact with her. Mildred is able to put all 4 girls, and I think this is really interesting, she put all 4 girls through college by herself after Ron had passed away. Mildred passed away March 27th, 2014, surrounded by her family in Stillwater, Minnesota.
And our final dress that we'll be highlighting is from 1947. It is the wedding dress of Lorraine Schneider, who married Leland Schweikel in 1947. And the 1940s dresses were an extension of the 1930s, the classic kind of style. But something that kind of came back into style was almost a corseted sort of waist, which accentuated the hourglass figure of the bride. Long sleeves, and sometimes they would even pad the hips. And in this particular dress, on the hips, there's kind of a piece of fabric that is, as you notice in the dress, looks like they're just kind of there. But when the lady put this particular dress on, there were straps along the thighs, which caused them to bow out a little bit. And even in the description that was given in the newspaper, it said the hoop skirt train. But there really wasn't a hoop skirt as much as this infrastructure that caused I don't even know what to call those pieces, to flare out a little bit. So again, this one falls in line with the 1940s almost hourglass, to accentuate the hourglass figure.
Well, here's another picture actually of Lorraine on her wedding day. This was one that was in the newspaper with her wedding clipping. Lorraine was a 1941 graduate of Marshfield Senior High School here in Marshfield, and she was actually born in 1924, also in Marshfield. She was a devoted wife, a mother, grandmother, great-grandmother, and a homemaker. She enjoyed unique desserts, working crossword puzzles, as well as visiting her children and taking trips to Door County. In this picture of Lorraine and Leland, I want to talk just a little bit more about Leland. Leland was born March 1st, 1923 in New London, Wisconsin. And since first grade, he had a nickname of Spike because he liked to go around poking people. He wasn't too happy about the nickname that he had received, but by the time he was 20 years old, people were still calling him Spike, and so he kind of just gave up and figured, well, this is my name, that, I'm just going to kind of live with it. So he accepted it rather than fight it. This is also a picture of Leland and Lorraine on their wedding day. They did go on to have 4 children, Judith, Gary, Jay, and Scott. Lorraine, a little bit about what she did. She worked or was employed as a private secretary for John Figge for over 41 years until her retirement. And while at Figge's, she was instrumental in initiating women's rights for the women workers at Figge's. And I think that's really important, that she was out there kind of blazing the trails in Marshfield for the women in some of the business places, particularly at Figge's. She was also a member of Sacred Heart Catholic Church and the Parish Council of Catholic Women. This picture is a picture of one of the businesses that Leland, or Spike, had. He was self-employed in the restaurant and tavern business. One of his lastly owned businesses was Spike's Uptown Bar, which is what this picture is. It was located at 107 South Central Avenue, and the building is still there. Obviously, Spike and the Uptown Bar is not there. After or even while he had this, he went on and had another business at the same time, and that was Spike and Booker's Westtown Bar Pizza Emporium. From the words that I've heard, people that do remember this place, the pizza was really good. It was located at 100 South Chestnut, in the same location, not the same building, but the same location that Scotty's Pizza is in now. So it must be something about the soil that it makes good pizza or something. After a brief retirement, he was also employed by the Fox Valley Liquor and also Associated Sales and Leasing in Marshfield. He was a member of the Sacred Heart Holy Name Society, an honorary member of the Knights of Columbus, John Eisen Council 1799, the Elks Lodge 665 of Marshfield, and the Fraternal Order of Eagles, Badger Air 624 of Marshfield. He was also a former vice president and a trustee of the Wisconsin Tavern League, formerly a member of the Marshfield Area Chamber of Commerce. He was also involved with numerous sports leagues and clubs and did a lot of volunteer work with them. Spike passed away September 17th, 2005 at his home in Marshfield.
One thing I forgot to mention about the Schweikel dress is this one is not a donation to the Historical Society. It is on a loan system. This is one of the dresses that the family decided they weren't sure they wanted to totally donate it to the Historical Society, so it is one that if they were to choose to take it back, they could, because it is on loan and it's not accessioned into the collection. This gave you an overview of just 6 of the dresses that we have on display. There are 33 dresses on display for this exhibit, and within the collection we have over 40, and I'm actually finding some tucked away in places that I didn't know as we go through. So one of the things that we initiated during this exhibit was Adopt a Wedding Dress project, and is an opportunity for people to help us preserve the dresses. Most of the dresses are in cardboard boxes that are large enough for them, and they're wrapped in acid-free tissue paper. But the cardboard over time, which is acidic, will cause the tissue paper to acidify, and that is not good for the dresses. And so one of the things that we are doing is within this Adopt a Dress program is asking folks who would be willing to be a part of it to donate $65, which is what the cost of the kit is. It's an acid-free box, costume size, and along with that comes enough tissue paper to pad and wrap each dress. This is something that is going to be ongoing for the year, and we are also finding within the collection there are other dresses that could benefit from this as well. So right now we have 8 dresses that have been adopted and 2 more pending. So that's 10 dresses, which would be $650 we would not be able to really do without the help of individuals. So if you're interested in helping us to preserve dresses, whether it is a wedding dress or even some of the other garments that we have in the exhibit or in the collection, please contact us here at the Historical Society. Our number is 715-387-3322, and you can talk to me, or you can find us on Facebook even. We have a group page as well as a fan page. So those are a couple of ways that you can get in contact with us. Also, as I mentioned, the wedding dress exhibit will be up until the end of February. And our hours here are Wednesdays and Saturdays for tours from 1:30 to 4 o'clock. We are also open during office time, which would be Mondays and Thursdays, 9 o'clock until 1. And then Wednesdays we're open a bit longer, from 10 o'clock until 4 o'clock. So there's other opportunities as well. If none of those times fit in, you can also arrange an opportunity to come in and see us. So those are just some ways that you can come see the wedding dress exhibit, or we have other things coming up. The next exhibit is going to be on woodworking, crafts, planers, and just different kinds of artifacts that people use within woodworking, as well as metallurgy, things which helped form the early parts of Marshfield. So hopefully you'll come and see us.
I just want to mention that this is the first actually in a series of lectures that's going to be done on the spoken history of Marshfield. And the next one is going to be the first Monday of the month in March at the Marshfield Public Library, the J.P. Adler Room, I don't have the topic with me. The time is going to be 7 o'clock, so you can check with the library on their website. As soon as they have that topic up and running, they will have it posted on there. Or we will be getting information out via Hub City Times and also cable access as soon as we have that information ready. I just want to also mention that this presentation was kind of co-sponsored with the Northwood County Historical Society and also the Marshfield Area Genealogy Group. At the bottom of the slide that you see right now is a link if you want more information on the history of the different styles of wedding dresses through the decades. This is one of the places that you could go to if you want more information. And with that, I want to thank everybody for tuning in and watching us. Kim?
Yep, thank you, and especially those who are joining us by link or just by link. Thank you for watching us.